Support for the Awkward Hour with Brian Staker is provided by Slug Magazine. Slug is proud to be Utah's oldest alternative music monthly. Check out slugmag.com to view the infamous daily calendar and for exclusive festival coverage, photo galleries, and videos.
I feel so awkward, you make me feel awkward. I feel so awkward with you. When I feel awkward, I like feeling awkward. When I'm being awkward with you, I wanna be awkward with you.
This week's guest on the Awkward Hour is Crispin Glover, talking about his films What Is It? And It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, playing at the Tower Theater in Salt Lake City, July 28th and 29th, 2012. I first saw you in River's Edge, and I was wondering why it seems like a lot of the films that you're in, you have an interest in darker and more disturbing themes, at least in the indie films that you've been in.
Okay. And what did you want to know exactly?
Why does it seems like you have an interest in appearing in films with darker or more kind of disturbing themes?
Okay. So what is the question?
Why are you interested in that?
Give me some more examples. You gave River's Edge. What else?
River's Edge, and I don't know, like the way you appeared in What Is It? It's kind of leading into talking about this trilogy of films. I'm sorry, I can't think of right off my head, but
and have you seen What Is It?
Yes. Oh, I loved it. Oh, I'm really looking forward to this one, to the second one.
And where did you see it?
I saw it here at the Tower Theater when you brought it. I think like 5 or 6 years ago. It was.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a while back. Yeah, that was the Tower was one of the earlier places that I came to show What Is It. I think I'd only been at the Alamo Drafthouse Theater in Austin, Texas before that. And I'd shown it in Sundance, and but the first two places I showed it outside of a festival were in Austin and Salt Lake. And when you saw it, I was still experimenting with how to present What Is It. When I showed it at the Tower, it was probably. Could have been as early as 2005, which would be, I'm on year 7 actually of touring. So, when you saw it, did you see me perform the live slideshow performance? Did I perform it, or there were a couple of times when I showed it without?
It's a little difficult to remember because it was so long ago, like 2005 or 2006.
Yeah.
I believe it was just the film, and you had question and answer afterward, which was really interesting to hear about that.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to coming back with both of the films this time, and I had yeah, of course, this time I'm just performing one show and showing the film once. I believe I'm showing What Is It on Saturday on the second night, and I'm showing It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, and performing a different slideshow before that one on Friday night. Or I'm sorry, it's on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
Saturday night I'll be performing Crispin Glover's Big Slideshow Part 2 and showing It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, which is called Part 2 of the trilogy, but it doesn't matter which order people see them in. And then on Sunday, I'll be showing What Is It, and before that performing Crispin Glover's Big Slideshow Part 1. And then there'll be a Q&A after each of the films, and then a book signing. But What Is It? I guess I'll say a little bit. River's Edge, you started to talk about that, which was that was the first film I acted in after I'd been in Back to the Future. Or rather, not after I'd been in Back to the Future. It was the first film I acted in after Back to the Future was released. And I was looking to find some kind of film after how much Back to the Future made, and I was looking, and how accepted it was. I was looking forward to finding films that psychologically represented some of my own, psychologically reflected what some of my interests were. And River's Edge was the first screenplay that I acted in right after the release of Back to the Future. And that screenplay was a well-written screenplay, and there are interesting things about it, good character and all of that. But and I'm proud of that film. I'm still proud of that film. But subsequent to that, in the 80s and 90s, most of the films that I acted in after River's Edge came out, or after I acted in River's Edge, they didn't necessarily reflect what my psychological interests were. They didn't necessarily make that much money, and that was not necessarily that good for my acting career. But I did try to find things that would have an interesting character or an interesting director to work with. But it wasn't until the late 90s when I'd already put Steve into What Is It. Stephen C. Stewart is the name of the man who wrote Part 2 of the trilogy, and he's the main actor in it. And Steve was from Salt Lake, and he wrote this screenplay that, well, I'll talk about that in a minute, actually. First I'll talk a bit about What Is It, and then I'll go into It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. But What Is It is part 1 of the trilogy, and most of the actors in the film have Down syndrome, but the film's not about Down syndrome at all. What it really is my psychological reaction to the corporate constraints that have happened in the last 30 years of corporately funded and distributed filmmaking, where anything that can possibly make an audience member uncomfortable is necessarily excised. But that film will not be corporately funded or distributed. And I think that's a very damaging thing, because it's that moment when an audience member sits back in their chair, looks up at the screen, and thinks to themselves, is this right what I'm watching? Is this wrong what I'm watching? Should I be here? Should the filmmaker have done this? What is it? That's the title of the first film. What is it that's taboo in the culture? What does it mean when the taboo has been ubiquitously excised? And again, I think it's an extremely damaging thing to have that happening in our corporately funded and distributed film world, because it's those moments when people are genuinely asking questions that there's a true education going on, meaning etymologically to learn from within. To have questions means something is genuinely happening in the mindset in terms of an experience that somebody can get something from educationally. And ubiquitously excise it, well, it means really the opposite of education. And what is the opposite of education? It's propaganda. And I would say that's what's going on in the corporately funded distributed film world now in these last 30 years. We have a propagandized corporate film community, and that's very bad. Now, the part 2 of the film, I put Steve into part 1, Stephen C. Stewart. I actually read his screenplay many years before he made part 1, What Is It? And I met with Steve. Steve had been born in Salt Lake, and in his early 20s, his mother died, and he was put into a nursing home there. People that were taking care of him at this nursing home, Steve did not want to be there. And he was a bit difficult to understand verbally. And they would derisively call him an MR, a mental retard. Which is not a nice thing to say to anybody, but Steve was of normal intelligence. And the emotional turmoil that he must have gone through in that decade, I can't even begin to imagine. But when he got out, he wrote this screenplay, and it was written in the style of a 1970s TV murder mystery movie of the week, where he's the bad guy. And this is something that was important to Steve, because he was a person with a disability, but he really wanted to emphasize being a person with a disability, and a person can have dark thoughts. You know, if you see a corporately funded and distributed film or a television show when there's a character that has a disability, basically that person is a benefactor, or that character that they're playing is a benefactor to society. Which is, you know, that's all very well and good. There are plenty of benefactors to society that are people that have disabilities. But it was important for Steve to be playing a person with a disability that had these dark thoughts, and because he'd written this screenplay in this genre style, there are certain truths that come out in its psychological makeup, as opposed to if he'd written as a standard autobiography. That the dynamic of that genre style gives this counterpoint that being that it's fantastical, the truths come ever much more clearly, and there's a genuine emotional catharsis that happens with this character, and this emotional catharsis that happens in the film is ultimately why when the whole trilogy is done, I feel like this will be the best film of the trilogy. But not only that, I feel like it'll be the best film of I'll have anything to do with in my entire career. And the reason that I say that is because of this emotional catharsis that happens. And I don't mean to dismiss What Is It. There are things that What Is It has that Everything Is Fine doesn't have, that I'm very proud of. But this emotional catharsis is something that is very, very strong and unusual, and I hold that high value. On top of which, the production value is quite beautiful. David Brothers also is from Salt Lake, and I co-directed it with David. And David built all of the gorgeous sets that are in the movie, and I funded the movie with the money that I made from the first Charlie's Angels film. And really, most of my salary went into the sets for the film, but I don't regret that. The sets are a huge part of the character of the film, and it makes the production value of the film feel really strong.
I wanted to ask you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that, as beautiful and striking as What Is It was, just visually and cinematically. I wanted to ask you about this one in particular because it was Stephen Stewart's script in this film, that these films in the trilogy really represent your artistic vision as a director, and yet this film, the second one, is also a vehicle for Stephen Stewart's fantasy, his psyche. How did you balance the two things?
It was part of why I knew what happened with What Is It. What Is It started out to be a short film that was going to promote a different screenplay, which ultimately will now end up being part 3 of the trilogy called It Is Mine. And the reason I was making What Is It was to go to a corporate entity of the viability of the majority of characters played by actors with Down syndrome, which is something that also is in the screenplay for It Is Mine. After I shot the short film, What Is It, I realized, because I'd shown the screenplay It Is Mine to one of the corporate entities that was interested in it. What It Is Mine was a screenplay that I didn't approach. It had a different title at the time, but I was approached by two young writers from Arizona that had wanted me to act in the screenplay that they were going to direct. It was the first time directing for one of these writers. I had been under the impression they had money. They really shouldn't have made the offer, though, because the fact is they didn't have any money. But it did cause me to read their screenplay, and there was something interesting about the screenplay. But there were certain things that didn't quite work. I had said to them I'd be interested in acting in it if I could change some of the concepts and direct it. They were okay with that idea. They came and met with me, and the main thing that I wanted that would fix the problem in their screenplay was for a majority of the characters to be played by actors with Down syndrome. They're okay with that concept. I set about to rewriting it, and David Lynch agreed to executive produce that movie for me to direct, which is a very nice thing for him to do.
Yes.
And
Wow.
The production meant wasn't money. It meant that he would step in with his name, which would help to raise money, which was, again, a nice thing for him to do.
Yeah.
And so I went to one of the larger corporate entities in Los Angeles that funds these, so-called independent films. I had a number of name actors that wanted to be involved, and they were interested, but they were concerned about having a majority of the characters being played by actors with Down syndrome. So it was decided that I should write a short screenplay that would promote this as being a viable idea. And I wrote this short screenplay called What Is It? That was about 20-something pages long, wherein all of the characters are to be played by actors with Down syndrome. I shot that, I edited that together in Adobe Premiere. This was back in 1996. And all of the characters will be played by actors with Down syndrome. We shot that in 4 days. It took me about 6 months to edit it together with Adobe Premiere, and that cut came together in 84 minutes. The final film of What Is It is 72 minutes long. So that's what I have 8 more days. I shot 4 days of filming after those initial 4. So the whole film was shot in 12 days, which is not that many days to shoot a feature.
No.
It was shot over 2.5 years as I was developing kind of the editing and writing of it. After the first 4 days of shooting, and I edited it up together, I realized that it was too long for the 4 days of shooting, or rather, it was too long for the amount of footage I had. But I realized with some more work, I could turn it into a feature film. And I also realized at the time that I'd read Steve's screenplay way back in 1986, and as soon as I read it, I knew that this would be something that I would have to fund myself. So, getting another telephone call. Hold on a
Sure.
second.
Okay.
Certain thematic elements of what Steve's referring to in his screenplay, and other they're just elements in general that thematically were similar. But before I say that, what I realized about the corporate entity that I met with was that what their real concern was not the concept, not the viability of having a majority of the actors with Down syndrome in the feature film as being something of concern, but it was the concept itself of having a majority of the characters played by Down syndrome, actors with Down syndrome, or in those characters do not necessarily have Down syndrome. And I think sometimes people think I'm saying that it's taboo to have a film where a majority of the characters are played by actors with Down syndrome. That's not taboo. You'll see television shows and the films where there are actors that have Down syndrome.
Yeah.
What you won't see is you won't have characters played by actors with Down syndrome wherein those characters do not necessarily have Down syndrome.
Right.
And that's an aspect to emphasize, because those characters you'll see actors with Down syndrome playing characters that are supposedly supposed to have Down syndrome. But really, probably it won't necessarily get into the truths of people with Down syndrome, and it'll be more of a kind of cutified, puppetized idea of what somebody that has Down syndrome is supposed to be like. And so it's not even really that accurate, but it's still, that's the concept. But what you definitely will not see actors with Down syndrome playing characters that do not necessarily have Down syndrome.
Yes.
And that's really quite important, because really I feel like, in all fairness, any person should be able to play any kind of character, at all. And because part of the fun of acting or is an interpretation and giving a thought or something. I understand that there can be a history or a sense where people feel like, well, if somebody's playing a character that's of a different race or something, that it can feel like there's a history of kind of a negative stereotyping that can happen, which I understand that, and I can understand why people get upset about that. But again, ultimately speaking, it really should be that anybody can play anybody, and there's a sense of fun in that, and should not necessarily be thought of as an absolute negativity immediately. But in any case, I realized that this was essentially taboo. I hadn't meant it to be taboo. It was just something that I was putting into the screenplay to promote the viability of the concept for this other screenplay, which had fixed a certain problem in that screenplay. But I had this innate taboo element, and I realized that this is something that I had realized that there's this innate taboo in the screenplay, and that this meaning something that can really ask questions. So a corporate entity would be concerned about the kind of question that people would ask about having this innate element with having actors that have Down syndrome, wherein those characters did not necessarily have Down syndrome. And they would be concerned about that people could ask questions like, why are you doing this? Are you making fun of these people? Are you taking advantage of these people? And of course, like I explained, this is not what the reasoning is, but I realize that this is something that all corporations at this point in time will not deal with anything that can possibly make any kinds of genuine questioning at all. And again, that's really a definition of taboo. And anything that can possibly have a taboo element is something that would not be dealt with. Again, that's excising all true questioning in one of our most important forms of communication, being corporate cinema. So I realized that I innately have this in this short screenplay, in this short film, as I was going to expand it into a feature, I should really make this a central theme, a central element of what was the film was dealing with. So it wasn't just that. There are other things already in the short film that had so-called taboo elements. I also realized that if I put Stephen C. Stewart into What Is It, his screenplay also dealt with taboo elements, and there were thematic elements that were related. And then if I put him into What Is It, as we expanded into a feature, that we could later make his screenplay into a feature. And that's how there's a thematic relationship. Now, what Steve was reacting to, Steve in my life is just so totally different from one another. And yet at the same time, what Steve was reacting to, he'd been, put into this nursing home against his will, and there's something that, and it's part of why his screenplay and ultimately his film is so effective, is because there was something that he was very strongly reacting to, which was his whole life. I'm reacting to corporate constraints of the film industry, which is important to me, and I do think there's an important issue in the culture at large, but ultimately on some level I can get up and walk away from that. Whereas Steve really, no matter how he rebelled, he was part of that community of people with disabilities that was not really possible for him to get up and walk away from. And I admire that quite a bit.
Yeah.
But there are thematic relationships between the films. There are two things that I very much related to with Steve. One is that he had a sense of humor. Well, first off, that he had a rebellion. And if Steve had only had a sense of rebellion, it would have not necessarily related as much to it. Or the other thing, he had a sense of humor. And Steve, if only had a sense of humor, would have not necessarily as much related to him. But those two things together, having a sense of humor and having a sense of rebellion both, that was something I could relate.
Yeah.
And when you see the films together, or on subsequent nights, they are very different films from one another. But there is a thematic relationship, and so it works all together. It's funny because I wrote and directed What Is It, and I've edited it, and I toured with it, of course, and financed it. On Everything Is Fine, I co-directed it with David Brothers. I co-edited it, financed it, I distributed it, but I'm equally possessive to Everything Is Fine as I am with What Is It. It's a funny something. Ultimately, what it was Steve had communicated something very well in his screenplay that I felt ultimately that if we did not get this film made, and if Steve had died, that I would have not felt good about myself. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people that ended up working on the film that felt the same way. Part of the way that I was able to make the film, I didn't pay. There was very little pay that went out just so I could be able to afford to make the film. And there were all kinds of people that did a lot of work on the film because they knew that there was something good that was happening for making this film of Steve's communication, and it ultimately came from Steve. He was a really excellent communicator ultimately, and even though he was difficult to understand verbally, and there's something about his communication that is crystal clear. And when you see the film, it's what I feel best about the film altogether, is that Steve when I read the screenplay way back in 1986, there was something in that screenplay that I felt like I knew I would have to be the person that would fund the film. And back then, that this element is communicated, and what I feel best about the movie is that emotional cathartic element that I could feel is in the original screenplay. It's in the movie, and that's the thing that's most important. David Brothers and I were very together on the concept that, we could have changed Steve's screenplay in any way we wanted to, and Steve would have been fine with it. But that wasn't what was important. What was important was we knew it was important for us to support it in such a way that it would feel as voluptuous and cinematically pleasing to support this kind of beautiful fantasy that Steve had written, and that emotional catharsis that was in the original screenplay is in the movie, and that's what I feel best about.
I wanted to ask you. You discussed the ways that What Is It addressed taboos. How does It Is Fine address societal and cinematic taboos?
Well, I don't really like to sell the films in that way. For me, both What Is It, when people attack What Is It, usually what they'll do is they'll list taboo elements and as though that's the reason why this thing. And I'm actually not interested in the taboo in either of the films. I know that there are taboo elements in them, but really the point ultimately of What Is It is that taboo is not important. There's a universe of ideas and thoughts that we could be getting into in our corporately funded and distributed cinematic world, but we're not getting. The taboos are used as blockades, where these are things you're not supposed to think or talk about or deal with. And Steve's film certainly has those taboo elements that have been broken down. What Is It is more of an exploration or a statement, so to speak, as to some of those taboo elements that you can feel some stuff not normally dealt with in corporately funded and distributed film. Steve's film, you can feel that, yes, the taboos exist in it, and yet at the same time, it feels like he's exploring something else, ultimately, which is really, really quite beautiful. And so I really like to point out the taboos, because then it just starts sounding salacious.
Yeah.
And that's really not interest is in either one of the films. It's there, but it's not what's important. Important is the boundaries that are set up by that are not important, and what's beyond those boundaries, that's what's important.
I understand that. I was wondering, in What Is It, parts of it are very surreal and dreamlike. I was wondering if you can talk about It Is Fine, the stylistically, is it more a straight narrative?
Yes, it's practically then What Is It? What is the syntax of the cinematic vocabulary, or the sentence structure of the topic, then What Is It is influenced by a more Louis style syntax. So films like Taboo or L'Age Dior, or you could even say later on, some of their outdog in some films even first started small, or Fata Morgana. Or other like well, but this syntax is a more unusual kind of dreamlike syntax than you'll see in corporately funded and distributed film. That's for What Is It? Steve's film was started in the style of some of these TV murder mystery movie of the week. So the syntax, the storytelling format is more recognizable. It's more the kind of...
Okay.
So the... Steve's film was written in the style of a 1970s murder mystery movie of the week. So the syntax of his story, his screenplay, was the more familiar syntax that you'll see in a corporately funded and distributed film. And the content, what his story is not what you'll see in a corporately funded and distributed film, especially in terms of the main character both being a character with a disability and being played by an actor with a disability, which did have a thematic similarity with What Is It? And this was probably something somewhere in my subconscious that I knew on some level while I was developing What Is It, wherein the characters that were being played by actors with Down syndrome, those characters did not necessarily have Down syndrome. And the characters acted in certain ways that you wouldn't normally see a character with developmental disability act like in a corporately funded and distributed film, because those characters would necessarily be benefactors to society. That was probably something that I'd been informed about in Steve's screenplay, and that was something very much a part of Steve's screenplays. He's playing a character with a disability, and of course Steve had a disability as well, and it was the same disability that Steve has, but his character's not necessarily a benefactor to society. He's a bad guy. I mean, Steve ultimately was a benefactor to society because he's making an important statement, and he did all kinds of things. But he thought of himself as what he would have called a handicapped rights activist. Word has changed, and now it's usually referred to as somebody with a disability. But he would have called himself a handicapped rights activist from early on, and he is. You know, there's an important statement being made ultimately in this film. A lot of things, you know, it's not just the same thing, there are complexities. And it really is quite beautiful. But I could see that there were these thematic similarities. And so even though the films are very different from one another, there are holdovers authors that make sense for them to be part of this trilogy.
So what kind of experience do you want the viewer to go away with from seeing the big slideshow and seeing these films?
Yeah, of course, the life aspect is something I haven't talked about. I should describe what that is. Starting in the early 1980s, I'd taken old books from the 1800s and reworked them and turned them into different books from what they originally were. The books are heavily illustrated, and virtually every page has an illustration on them. When I first started publishing them, people said to me I should have a book reading because this is what authors do. Well, the books are so heavily illustrated that if I just were to stand on the stage or platform, whatever, in front of people and read them, because the books are so heavily illustrated, it would lose part of the way the stories move along is the illustrations. So I realized I needed to have slides of the images of the books projected behind me. And then in 1982, there was a film festival that has the work that I'd done up to that point, and they had kind of a retrospect. And so I realized with the this format, I should do that show. I picked 8 of the books, and the first time I ever performed it went perfectly well. People really liked it, and it made sense that I should do it some more. People invited me to perform the show more, and people enjoyed the show. And I realized this would be a way that I could distribute my own films. And so it took a while, but then in 2005 I started being able to self-distribute What Is It? And in 2007 I started also touring with It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. And at which point I started developing a second slide. That one took a little bit more time to develop, but it's a different slideshow from the first one, and I performed that slideshow before It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. Each of the slideshows are an hour long. There are 8 different books in the slideshows, and after the slideshow, I present the film. After the film, there's a Q&A, and then after the Q&A, there's a book signing. Actually, in Salt Lake, when I'm doing the Q&A for Everything Is Fine, I think David Brothers is going to be there, which is fun for me because, I tour around with the film, and of course I co-directed it with David.
Yeah.
But I go and then Q&As by myself. But David, of course, had not a small part, a huge part of making the film. We co-directed it. So being that we'll be in Salt Lake, I think he's going to be able to come up and answer questions as well, which will be nice. But in any case, after that, then there'll be a book signing. So it's a long evening. It's over 4 hours, but I get a lot out of it, and audiences get a lot out of it, I think, as well. And it's an enjoyable event.
I got a lot out of it when I went to and that was years ago, just the one film and a Q&A. And
when I first showed it at the Tower, because I hadn't I was experimenting to see what the best way to distribute it was. I did some shows where just the film played, some shows where there was the film with a Q&A, and then some shows with the slideshow. I've come to realize over the years that was one of the very few times I ever did that. I realized the best way for me to distribute the film is only show it with the slideshow, the film, the Q&A, and the book signing. Really, the way I've ultimately recouped on the films, and I only did that at the beginning of last year. But when I say I've recouped on the films, what I really mean is the way I normally do the split with the theaters. I split 50-50 what they normally charge for their entry to the film. So if they're charging 10 for their film, I get 5 and they get 5. Of that. And that's, so generally the admission to the show is $20. So when I'm saying that I've recouped 50% by the live performances, 25% by the box office of the film, and 25% by book signings. So technically speaking, I haven't recouped on the box office for the features. I've only recouped a quarter of that money by the feature itself. It would really mean I'd have to tour 4 times the amount of time that I already did take to recoup, which was 6 years, which would mean I'd have to basically recoup. I'd have to basically tour for something like 20 more years.
Wow.
For that to truly happen. But ultimately, that didn't matter to me. All that mattered to me was that I was able to bring in the amount of money that it took for me to make these films in order to justify to make another film, and that's ultimately what's happened.
Well, I'm really glad that I went to the Q&A. That really added to the experience last time, and I'm really looking forward to everything that goes into it this time. Are you starting to work? Have you done anything toward the third part of the trilogy?
No, I won't work on that next. I'm building sets right now in the Czech Republic where I own property to continue. I like to shoot on sets, and I'll continue doing that out there. For various reasons, it's made sense to own the property out there. Property taxes are much lower. And space that I got at a very good price when I bought it 8 years ago. But I've been working on this trilogy since 1996, and there are themes that still will be part of part 3. I need to step away from this trilogy for a number of years, and I need to work on other thematic films. Yeah. And I'm working for myself and my father, acting together. My father and I've never acted together before. Actually, he's in part 2. He's in It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. Yeah. But he and I have never acted together, so I've been developing something for myself and my father to act in together. Nice. There's some other things that I've been developing to work on, same sets that I've been building out in being built in the Czech Republic. And then at some point, a number of years later, it will make sense to get back into the trilogy, but it doesn't matter to shoot that one next by any means. Do you have the script for the part 3 yet, or is that written at all? That was the one that was written way back in 1996. Which part 1? What is it? Was the purpose of making that was to promote the viability of having the majority of the characters played by actors with Down syndrome, wherein those characters do not necessarily have Down syndrome. So it's in the same universe as What Is It? But again, I need to step away from that. So will it use some of those same actors, or do you know? It's hard to know. There are certain actors I would very much like to work with, but I can't say until I'm in production of that, and that's going to be a number of years from now. Would it use actors with Down syndrome? Yes, that's part of what the screenplay, as I've described, the reason for making What Is It was to promote that as being a viable idea. So it's very much a part of that screenplay. Okay, well, you've answered all my questions. It's been really wonderful being able to talk to you. I'm a huge fan, and this is just really a thrill that you took the time to talk to me, and I'm really looking forward to the show this weekend. Yeah, I appreciate it, and I'm glad we're able to get this up, and send me a link to it when when you've got it up. I will. And looking forward to seeing it, and looking forward to seeing you at the show.
Okay.
And we've got to put your name on the list. Are you already in contact with them at the tower?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, great. So yeah, your name will be on the list.
Okay.
Okay, fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you too. All right.
Okay.
I look forward to seeing you at the show.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot. Have a
Thanks.
great day.
You too. Bye.
Okay.